Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of our ongoing editorial webinar series, Coffee Talk. Each hour-long information-packed episode organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine features the observations and insights of an independent expert on a wide range of tech industry topics. Many thanks to the underwriting sponsor of this episode, Red Canary, a pioneer of managed detection and response to secure your endpoints, cloud, and whatever comes next. Without their support, this series would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of the Converge 360 Group of 1105 Media, and I'll be your moderator. Today's topic is Managed Detection and Response, What IT Leaders Need to Know. And our lead presenter is Ian Thornton-Trump, Chief Information Security Officer at threat intelligence services provider Cyjax. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. This episode is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. We'll make some time during the talk for some questions. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. On your attendee console, you'll see some extra resources provided by our sponsor. Be sure to check those out. And as a small thank you to the first 200 attendees who stick with us to the end, we will be sending you a $5 gift certificate to Starbucks. It's a cup of joe to go with the info. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Cybersecurity expert Ian Thornton-Trump is an ITIL certified professional with 25 years of experience in IT security and information technology. His early career spanned the military intelligence branch of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Forces Military Police, and the RCMP. Yep, that's the Mounties, where he served as a criminal intelligence analyst. He later worked as a cybersecurity consultant for multinational insurance, banking, and regional healthcare organizations. Today, he serves as Chief Information Security Officer at Cyjax Limited in the UK and Chief Technical Officer at Octopi Managed Services in Canada. I just want to make sure I got that right, Octopi. Ian's ongoing research, his years of experience, and his genuine passion for building effective cyber threat intelligence programs for small, medium, and enterprise-sized organizations have made him a sought-after analyst and consultant, and he's one of our very favorite presenters. You are in for a great presentation. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you so much, John. Really my pleasure to be here. And folks, this is a very passionate topic for me. As John mentioned, I'm CTO of a managed service provider, and I know the pain. And in the Cyjax world with the threat intelligence, I've got some great stories for you this morning/afternoon, whatever time zone you happen to be in. I just want to kind of point out that my journey into this has always been from the threat actor perspective. You know, started off in the military intelligence branch, worked as a military police officer, spent some time with the RCMP, and then one of the best jobs I ever had was being a brigade public affairs officer so that I was able to speak and present comfortably in front of all of you. So, valued viewers, let me tell you this, you're in for an absolutely wild ride because I was talking with the team from Red Canary behind the scenes. If you're going to follow me online, go ahead and give them a like and follow them on Twitter and, of course, on LinkedIn, where the professionals do business. There you go. Well, you know, it's always great to start off with a little bit of an understanding of the current threat landscape. And there you have it. It is an absolute train wreck out there right now. And not to put a too finer point on it, but we are kind of losing a lot of ground towards the really aggressive ransomware crews that are out there that are now sort of doing the bidding of nation-state actors. I was asked to start doing some research into sort of like how I saw the threat landscape changing. And fundamentally, the blur between APT groups, the advanced persistent threat groups that, you know, are directly state-sponsored, to the current outsourcing that's going on with Anonymous Sudan, Killnet, and other organizations that have sort of are really conducting aggressive cyber attacks on all manner of different businesses, carefully avoiding attacks that could be deemed Article 5 actions under the NATO charter. And this is a really important thing because it used to be sort of like a kind of generic spray of, I'm going to say, cyber criminal activity and APT espionage. Now, most of the APT groups that we've seen and tracked, like the North Koreans, the Iranians, the Russians, of course, and the Chinese, have particular missions at the state level. But they're also in a lot of their own conflicts and are taking a lot of their cyber resources that they used to use for espionage. And of course, if you're North Korea, you're looking for opportunities to extort, ransom, or attack Bitcoin exchanges for fiat currency. But what we're seeing is a lot of these groups now are closely affiliated with and supported and are allowing cyber criminal operations to occur with the idea of being anything that's bad for NATO or Western Europe or the United States is good for our agenda. And so the cyber crime, I'm going to say, is in a way is like moving towards the small, medium, and enterprise businesses are out there. And we'll get into a little bit, and I'll tell you about my weekend because, folks, it's been an absolute wild ride. Now, I want to focus in on what is actually sort of being attacked, what the areas of concern are for organizations. I put the "you must be this tall to ride this ride" up there because this is a kind of thing where there has to be a minimum investment in a business. Otherwise, any of the security tools you deploy to advanced MDR services, but even the most basic security tools are just not going to work. And we're not helping ourselves right now when the organizations are struggling with legacy systems that they have exposed on the internet. This is a huge attack surface that I'm going to drill into a little bit because it's the major cause of some major data breaches and ransomware epidemics that are sweeping the globe right now. We have a lack of compensating security controls deployed in front of those legacy systems and exposure. When anonymous Sudan with a 4G hotspot in whatever African countries they're operating from can take out Microsoft and cause us to have grief over here for Office 365 outages and Outlook Online outages, there is definitely a understanding that organizations are getting pen tested and are being exploited and are being evaluated for weaknesses by threat actors in order to disrupt operations. And this is buoyed up a lot in the World Economic Forum data that came out, that the biggest fear after sort of regulatory and compliance, non-compliance issues that are found out as a result of a data breach scenario, it is disruption to the business's ability to conduct business. And this is becoming big. Now, it could be ransomware, it could be a security incident, and it could be an actual honest-to-goodness mistake. So it's really, really important to look at those compensating security controls in order to protect the things that are a bit vulnerable. And I've got a great story, again, coming back to this weekend that I've been involved in later on in the presentation for you guys. Other big areas of concern: inaccurate configuration management databases and IT asset management. These are the ugly stepchilds, and this is the silo that is really difficult for security teams and IT teams to become aligned. And we could have an amazing presentation where I discuss where I feel that where security needs to report to. I don't necessarily think it's healthy to have security at the boardroom table. I know, like, okay, I just set fire to a few people's ideas in the room, right? Because we've been clamoring to try and get to the boardroom table, but I think there might be a better way to do it. We'll park that one, but we'll definitely have that discussion at some point in the future with the Redmond Channel Partners team. Flat networks are a huge problem where lateral movement can take place in an instant, doesn't have to go through a set of different VLANs or different security controls internally. Once the bad guys get inside, they race all over the place and they move really, really quickly. And then the other two things that we're really getting hammered on is this minimal investment in security skill sets. Now, that's not anything to do with the resources that you have. It's the lack of alignment between the business strategy, i.e. digital transformation, and suddenly not telling the security team that they might need some cloud security skill sets. This is a big play for the MDR people who have a solid grasp of cloud infrastructure and the best practices when it comes to security, and of course, tons of endpoint expertise, forensics, and tracking down what those real problems are. This is going to help you fill the gaps because there are huge gaps. We hear about this all the time. And of course, laissez-faire vulnerability practices to the point where occasionally the Department of Justice has to create a situation where the FBI is going to patch stuff for you, and we're going to actually talk about that. Because as far as I'm concerned, if a third-party agency, law enforcement, government has to come and manage your infrastructure for you, that should be reflected in your performance review, yeah? Okay. So the other thing that is really causing us a lot of grief in cyber right now is not paying attention to CISA. Now, CISA has something we like to call the KEV. I've written a lot about the KEV, but this is the known exploited vulnerabilities. This piece of cyber threat intelligence, because that's exactly what it is, got to send a shout out to our chief lady of cyber, Jennifer Esterhazy, who has inherited this and supported it and kept it going. This is exactly the way to approach your vulnerability management in your organization. There's so much discussion on this because just because it's a CVE 9 or critical doesn't necessarily mean you have to interrupt everything and disrupt your business in order to get it patched. There are circumstances where you can have internal stuff that has huge numbers of CVEs, but if it's protected, if it has mitigating controls around it, it may be, and it is not externally exposed, maybe you can kind of take it down a notch and you can focus on what needs to actually be addressed in your organization. We all are faced with the legacy infrastructure that can't be patched and can't be isolated. Again, expert advice required. There are things that we have in our infrastructure that are no longer robust enough to withstand cyber attacks. I am going to get into that with some great slides, which are, hopefully my audience is really going to appreciate on this coming up. But I also want to talk a little bit about exploited protocols as well. Exploitable protocols are a real problem within the organization, especially from the management side of the fence, where some of us, especially in OT environments, are still having to use Telnet, FTP, and other services in order to manage that infrastructure. This is a huge problem from a cybersecurity perspective that we, again, need to be very vigilant about how we're controlling access to that, how we're using that, and whether or not, and logging, of course, to try and find out if something anomalous is happening within that network infrastructure. Okay, so I've spilled the beans on all the problems that we have. I want to now give you a bit of context on one heck of a big event. Now, the Colonial Pipeline breach. This is what was disclosed in terms of how it all went down, okay? And this is an exact kind of like copy where you could insert any business. Now, let's back up 1 second, talk about the Colonial Pipeline breach. This was a situation where the OT environment was never at risk and it was never penetrated. It was the billing system that got hammered by ransomware, all right? And we probably read all about that. But honestly, like from an incident response perspective, the fact that they could disclose exactly how it came down, how it fell apart, right, was really good news because at least they had the visibility on their organization to kind of get into this. So here's the story. A set of credentials appeared on a dark web password leak prior to the publication of RockU 2021. RockU 2021, if you follow Troy Hunt and you subscribe to Have I Been Pwned. RockU 2021 was like an amalgamation of a whole bunch of other data breaches into one big, massive data breach list, right? And it was announced as being sort of like a super list. Okay, fair enough. But the login was outdated, but here we go, no longer used by any employees, but still valid in the Colonial Pipeline network and not protected by multi-factor authentication. This is, again, this goes to that identity and access management piece that is really difficult for enterprise organizations, okay? Now, should those credentials have been rotated? Absolutely, no question. But interestingly enough, they found that it was a VPN endpoint that essentially had been forgotten about. Now, there is speculation in the community that VPN endpoint also was susceptible to a series of zero-day attacks that we saw that would yield user IDs and passwords by external remote code execution. Bad, okay? So we got a couple of things here. We got neglected infrastructure. We've got difficulty in identity and access management, and we have a lack of multi-factor authentication. This equals tragedy, right? Now, a little bit of a side note here is that the attackers also appear to have explored the system for a little over a week before sending the ransom note and activating the ransomware. So they were moving around within the organization. That's a big thing, that your EDR, your MDR, all of your SIEM and everything like that should have noticed these type of lateral movements. But unless you have a situation where there are some detection, like some sensors, or even some points where you would need to move from one privileged access location to another privileged access location, and that is, got some rules around it in terms of like segmentation, again, you're into a real problem. So this high-level issue is like one of those that has, a huge detection and response and investigation piece. It's got those best practices in terms of identity and access management, and it also has a sad story about ITAM. And I think that really pulls together some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about, especially in this next stuff, where we get absolutely kind of focused now on some of the major stories that are out there. Okay, so first, let's have a conversation about the fact that disruptive activity is taking place by cyber actors across the globe. Depending on what they can find, they'll use tools like DNS Dumpster. They'll look at IP addresses that are presented on Shodan, and they will just try to denial of service it or see if it can be exploited. Generally, with the latest version of Kali Linux and Metinterpreter, there are exploit packages that are bundled in that. So in terms of the threat model, a lot of this stuff needs to be headed off at the pass by testing your own infrastructure. Now I want to call out why you need professional help when you're in a data breach scenario. Captia, which is a big government contractor here in the UK that handles a lot of government services, they handle pension funds, they're a big IT outsourcing. They did an absolutely horrible job of drip feeding the public and drip feeding everyone in terms of the actual data breach. They didn't have the facts, or if they did, they were not giving them to the people that were asking for it, including their government clients, were left in the dark. Communication is the number one thing that is a hugely important issue when you're talking about, data breaches and stuff like that. And of course, human mistakes are a big piece of this issue as well. And we actually had a major incident here in the UK over the weekend where the 999 system, which is the 911 system in America, went down, a big chunk of it across across the UK. Now, it turns out it was a problem in a British telecom data center, or BT as we like to call it. But man, because everybody was on high alert about Russia and the craziness in Russia with the Wagner group, a lot of people were going to jump to the conclusion this was a cyber attack. But also, what I said when I was in communication with one of the folks that regularly appears on Sky News here in the UK, and I said, listen, we're also hit with record high temperatures. It almost got into the 90s here in the UK, which is a big deal. Most of the folks in California and the southern parts of the United States go, 90 degrees is a beautiful day. For us here, that's a pretty rare occurrence. So we had some record temperatures. Our infrastructure here is a few thousand years older than the United States. And of course, it could have been anything from, a global climate change related event, a farmer digging up some fiber connection in the back of their yard. So again, because of the context that we're under right now, human mistakes can really be interpreted and spun as major cyber attacks. And if you're a vendor in the space, don't do that. It's terrible because you look awful when that happens. Now, one of the other things that I want to say in terms of a value proposition for MDR is really about detecting insider threats within your organization. Now, Nicholas Sharp, I did include, and I hope they have it in the resources, his indictment, because it's worth a read. This is a guy that ransomwared his own company, which company one is actually Ubiquity Networks, okay? He ransomwared his own company and tried to extort a bunch of money from him. Now, this is really, really important, and this strikes to the point of having that investigative capability that an MDR vendor or really good telemetry can help you piece together whether or not you're looking at an external threat actor or an internal threat actor that is working, inside the business and to create problems. The nice thing about having an external vendor to help you with this determination is there can't then be allegations of being prejudiced towards that particular person when you have a third party saying, these are the facts, ma'am. This is exactly what happened. This is the timeline event. It becomes indisputable. Where it gets a bit difficult is when the IT department of an organization or a security department wants to be all, cops and robbers and guns and badges, right? This is a terrible idea. These types of investigations where there's a potential activity have to be treated with caution. The evidence needs to be gathered. The conclusions and the evidence package has to be presented to the business to make decisions about what's going on. But if you have an opportunity, I think you might be able to even Google Nicholas Sharp, DOJ indictment. It's absolutely worth a read and is an absolute great business case for getting in that level of vision that an MDR solution can give to your business. Now, I said we were going to talk about some good old 70s and 80s hits. What we're seeing from the threat actor perspective is rapid exploitation of the MOVE-IT type of application or appliance in terms of its exploitation with the number of remote code execution. The CLOP ransomware crew, which I was working on a data breach scenario for a customer this weekend, along with my team, gathering the information from the world's most awful criminal-hosted website. The reliability was just absolutely awful, but we needed to determine what the level of exposure is for that customer, and unfortunately, the only way to determine that level of exposure is to look at what the actual bad guys got, right? And then, of course, the Barracuda story is just one where it goes to a whole narrative that I frequently talk about, which is the old stuff that you have, even though you're comfortable with it as an IT or a security team, the old stuff that you have is the biggest liability you have, right? If it's a beige box in the data center, you know when that thing falls over, it's going to be bad news, right? The only reason it's still there is either everybody's scared of it or it's so business critical, but unfortunately, it's long past its service life. The hardware is on borrowed time, and the software is probably riddled with vulnerabilities, right? So So in the case of the Barracuda ESG appliance, we have a situation, and it's not going to be the last situation that this happened. It is very similar in a way to what happened with Microsoft on-premise Exchange, and the fact that there were a series of 0 days launched at Exchange, presented externally either through Outlook Web Access or through the SMTP daemon or the IMAP protocol. Whatever you have it, these devices that have that code base from, let's say, 2010, around that time period, down to, 2000 early era of computing, some of this stuff is running that code. That code is vulnerable, and it will not be able to withstand the modern threat actor if it's internet exposed. So this is a cautionary tale that when we talk about IT lifecycle management, it's not just about the endpoints, the servers, the workstations. It's about all of the infrastructure that you have, the switching, those appliances, those email gateways, those VPN endpoints, right? You wouldn't drive a car down the road with like bald tires and no brakes, but yet your old, a VPN concentrator has long since been lifecycle management out of the organization, and it is going to have 0-day attacks. It's my favorite thing too, is like in the world, the Cisco RV series of routers, those series of routers. I love them. I knew everything there was, but unfortunately they've now been completely sunsetted because they have a unpatchable vulnerability in them. And a lot of this stuff comes from the fact that the firmware and the booting process is not secure on these devices. So if you as a threat actor can find a way to worm in to the earliest parts, like even before the kernel starts up, and inject your malware, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And then again, ESXi and VMware, I mentioned Microsoft Exchange on-premise, older Microsoft Remote Desk protocol running on like Server 2008, long since life cycled. But you go and ask Shodan, and you can find plenty of those on the interwebs still alive. And then the whole horror stories of SonicWall and Fortinet and all of the other vendors who suffered VPN-related 0-day attacks with remote code execution. We have to make network devices and VPN endpoints a big part of our lifecycle management and our threat model. Otherwise, we're just going to be completely vulnerable all the time. And so, once you decide that, listen, like this security thing, we're a complex organization. We have a lot of needs. We have a need for expert support because, the security team is under-equipped to deal with the digital transformation initiatives that are going on. Here's what I would do. If I can carve out a budget to go with an MDR firm, I then focus the security team on that security awareness training baseline, improve that in your organization, focus on building and validating an incident response plan as on all of the audit findings. Everybody checks the box that says we have an incident response plan, but have we actually validated? Have we run an exercise on it? Have an honest conversation about disaster recovery. Folks, I've been in scenarios, and one of the things, actually going back to what I was talking about, Colonial Pipeline, they chose to pay the ransom because they did not have confidence in their ability to restore the data faster than the cyber criminals could give them a tool to decrypt the data that they had encrypted. That's kind of a sad state of affairs, and something that I think really would need to be addressed. Take a look at your audit and your pen test results and start moving the ball forward on that. Really maybe take some of the team members that have an interest in it and start talking about threat intelligence and supply chain security, get a view of what's going on and start getting out of the bunker, the security bunker, and meet the folks. Start talking to the business about the business strategy, about digital transformation, about all the opportunities that might be out there in terms of you to communicate your value to the organization. Because at the end of the day, the security team there is not the department of no. It's the department of how can we help you today? I talk about this in IT leadership all the time. your Net Protector score, the NPS score for the security team, should be the most important KPI in the organization. You should try to move from enforcement and nasty words like that to facilitation, engagement, and customer service delivery. If you start focusing your security team and your IT teams on that, you will be gainfully employed, and you'll get one huge benefit out of it. That benefit is that when the organization goes into crisis, you'll get support rather than getting shanked in the shower by everyone that you pissed off while you were leading the security team or the IT team. So my advice to you is think about the consequences of not answering that email or ignoring that request, and think about how you can be better at engaging with the business and supporting the business. So on that positive note, let's go to some Q&A out there, and I think we have some questions, and I can now introduce Kevin G. from Red Canary.
Before we get to that, I just want to remind everybody that you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and we'll do our best to get to all of them.
Amazing.
Okay, so let's. So thanks, Ian, especially for that very vivid shanked in the shower image. So we've got quite a few. We've got quite a few questions here. Let's get started with the one from Lynn James, who joins us often with some very intelligent questions. I want to give her him or her a shout out. I still don't know which is which. But the question is, what are the key considerations that IT leaders should keep in mind when selecting an MDR provider?
This is
Ian,
really about.
Okay.
Yeah, man, go ahead, and then I can reinforce your points there.
Yeah. So basically, what I was going to say is, like, in general, I think a lot of the MDR providers, like what we do, there's going to be a lot of similarities. So it's sometimes a little difficult to kind of dig into some of the differentiators. I think some of the biggest things to pay attention to are how they kind of structure their support, how they structure the threat response aspect of the MDR parts of it. So are they charging you separately for that support? Are they forcing you to hire like a threat response retainer, or is that included in the licensing off the bat, right? A lot of what Red Canary does is all kind of built in. So we're there doing the monitoring for you, but we'll also help you respond and remediate. Another part is, like, how do they do those remediations? What are kind of the key features there? Like, do they support automated remediation through playbooks? Do they provide that sort of technical threat hunter to do sort of guided remediation? Can they do active remediation? So, like, if you're not available, are they able to go in hands-on into your systems and remediate something, right? Because the quicker you nip something in the bud, you're going to be preventing those bad things from happening. And then just kind of focusing on customer scores, kind of customer reviews. How are they viewed across the industry? And kind of a lot of just kind of generally, like, their general capabilities and their threat research and intel. Like, how are they staying up to date with the latest threat techniques and stuff like that? Where are they putting their focus? And do they develop a lot of that in-house? I think those are some of the major ones. And then paying attention to some of the analyst reports out there, which is kind of an unfortunate aspect of just any cybersecurity industry, but kind of, following like the MITRE evals that came out recently earlier this year, the Forrester waves, stuff like that, just to be able to help separate and gain a bit more information on what the key differences are and how others kind of view them as well. And then, yeah, Ian, feel free to chime in with whatever you were going to say too.
I think you came up with some great sort of like tactical indicators. I'm going to blow it up and go strategic. I need a therapist when it comes to IT security. I want someone to bounce ideas off of. I want to get that vibe like these people are passionate about looking after my business, but I also want that comfort of, do they have some reference accounts that look a lot like mine? Are they comfortable working in the environments that I have? Because there's huge diversity in a lot of businesses, and when you start talking about OT environments and supply chains, if the word Rockwell comes up, you want to have the confidence that that customer has expertise in that area to help you out and detect, anomalous behavior and chase it down. And I think lastly, it comes down to can I get a report that will give us the information that we need, that can be put in front of a senior management, that can tie an incident with a nice bow on it, right? And have it go away instead of sort of being constantly asking questions back and forth. So I think there's a lot of value in what Kevin said about sort of that tactical level of things to execute. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's the business relationship that becomes vital, because you really are in a partnership relationship. So you should be able to talk openly and honestly.
I love it. Yeah, I think transparency is definitely key here. With anything dealing with cybersecurity, right? You want to be transparent with the partners that you partner with. So,
I just want to let the attendees know that who Kevin is. So that's Kevin G, Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager, Red Canary. So we've got a question here from Shauna. It's for Ian. In terms of SIEM ingestion, do you have suggestions on what we need versus what's available?
Right. So this is where you go to your experts and they say, this is the type of telemetry we need to give you a read on what is going on out there in order to get the threat indicators that will, start tipping the scales into, just a standard incident and now an incident that needs to be investigated, and what kind of priority that investigation should take. So, I can't sort of go, well, you need the outbound firewall traffic, you need the inbound firewall traffic through the ports that you have open and the access control list, and then you need, sensors within your cloud environment. That's sort of more for your security architects from the MDR vendor. But what you need is enough information to be able to rapidly stomp down on anything that gets inside the walls of your business. Because at the end of the day, the damage is going to occur after the bad guys have a foothold, and the real battleground is getting the indications that a foothold has been attained and that there's now some traffic coming out of your network that had never really appeared there before, and that requires a rapid response. So I think, from my perspective, it's all about asking what are the best practices in getting visibility into your particular network based on the business risks, right?